Welcome to Goddesses. I'm your host, Blair Minerva. Today on Goddesses. In today's episode, witness the rise of a figure hailed as the mother of the nation and the shocking turn that led to her condemnation. What happens when a symbol of hope becomes entangled in the very violence she sought to overcome? And what does her story reveal about the price of fighting for what you believe in, even when it costs you everything? They called her the mother of the nation, but motherhood is never simple, especially when your children are millions and your home is a country bleeding from the wounds of oppression. Imagine a woman whose eyes could ignite revolutions. A woman who transformed from a gentle social worker into a revolutionary flame that refused to be extinguished. This is the story of Winnie Mandela, not the sanitized version you might know, but the raw, unfiltered journey of a woman who dared to fight when the world told her to be silent. South Africa in the mid-20th century was a machine designed to crush human dignity. Picture a world where the color of your skin determined every breath you could take, where children in Soweto played in dust-choked streets, their futures already predetermined by a system that saw them as less than human. Into this crucible of injustice, Nomzamo Winnie Madikizela was born, a name that would later become synonymous with resistance. In the small village of Bizana, young Winnie's world was painted in vivid contradictions. The rich earth of her homeland whispered stories of strength, even as personal tragedy carved deep wounds into her young heart. By 9, she had already lost her mother and sister to tuberculosis, losses that would have shattered most children. But Winnie was different. Her childhood was a symphony of resilience. Where others saw vulnerability, she cultivated an unbreakable spirit. The Xhosa language around her sang of survival. The landscape of rolling hills and vast skies taught her that boundaries are meant to be challenged. Even then, she was learning her first lessons about resistance. When Winnie became the first Black social worker at Baragwanath Hospital, she didn't just see patients, she saw systems. Her research into infant mortality wasn't just medical. It was a microscope revealing the brutal inequalities of apartheid. Every child's death was an indictment, every statistic a revolutionary manifesto. But compassion alone couldn't dismantle a system designed to oppress. Her social work was a bandage on a wound that required radical surgery, and Winnie was about to become the surgeon. Imagine underground meetings where whispers could get you killed. Dimly lit rooms filled with the smell of fear and hope, a potent mixture that would fuel a revolution. This was Winnie's new classroom. When Nelson Mandela was imprisoned, she didn't just become a wife waiting for her husband's return. She became the voice he could not be. Her transformation was not gentle. It was a volcanic eruption of purpose. Public speaking became her weapon. Each rally, each speech was a grenade lobbed into the fortress of apartheid. She wasn't just talking, she was igniting souls. Her words were fire, her passion was fuel, and her target was a system that had stolen everything from her people. Let's talk about the necklace, not as a weapon, but as a metaphor. It represented the ultimate price of resistance. How far would you go to fight a system that sees you as less than human? Winnie posed this question not just to her followers, but to the entire world. Her methods became controversial, but controversy is the language of true revolution. When peaceful protests were met with bullets, when children were massacred, when humanity was stripped away, what rules of engagement remained? The anti-apartheid movement began to fracture. Activists who once celebrated Winnie now questioned her tactics. The media, that fickle beast, began to paint her as a villain. But villains are often just people who refuse to play by rules designed to keep them oppressed. Her association with necklacing and the tragic Stampai Sepe incident became turning points. She was no longer just a revolutionary. She was becoming a complex symbol of resistance that made people uncomfortable. And discomfort, my friend, is often the first step toward real change. If you're enjoying Goddesses, please like, subscribe, and scan the QR code for our free 7-day email course, Be an Unstoppable Woman. Lead without apology using quiet power tactics from influential females like Oprah, Malala, and RBG. Now, back to the episode. When apartheid finally crumbled, the world expected a neat narrative of triumph. But revolutions are messy, and Winnie Mandela was never one to fit into comfortable stories. Her personal fall was as dramatic as her rise. Nelson Mandela walked free, and the world celebrated. But for Winnie, freedom was more complicated. Her marriage, once a powerful symbol of resistance, dissolved under the weight of years of separation and diverging paths. She was no longer just the wife of a hero, but a controversial figure in her own right. Brandfort became her crucible. Isolated, constantly surveilled, she could have been broken. Instead, she transformed isolation into power. She created community gardens, soup kitchens, health committees, turning her forced exile into a laboratory of resistance. Where others saw punishment, she saw opportunity. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission became her most public trial. Here, she was forced to confront the most painful chapters of her struggle. Not as a hero, not as a villain, but as a human being shaped by an inhuman system. You might want a simple story. Heroes and villains, good and evil. But Winnie Mandela existed in the gray spaces between. Her methods were controversial, her pain was real, her commitment was absolute. She challenged not just apartheid, but the very notion of how resistance should look. Imagine fighting a system so deeply entrenched that survival itself becomes an act of rebellion. Every breath Winnie took was a challenge to a world that wanted to erase her, her people, her very existence. South Africa changed, but change is never complete. The poverty, the divisions, they remained. Winnie's legacy wasn't about perfect victory, but about persistent resistance. She showed that fighting for justice is never a clean, comfortable journey. So here's the real question. What system are you willing to challenge? What injustice will you refuse to accept? Winnie's war wasn't just against apartheid. It was against the human tendency to accept the unacceptable. Her story isn't a template. It's a mirror, reflecting back the parts of yourself that are afraid to speak, to fight, to transform. She didn't just resist a political system. She resisted the idea that anyone could define her limits. In the end, Winnie Mandela was neither saint nor demon. She was profoundly human. A woman who loved deeply, fought fiercely, and was transformed by a struggle larger than herself. As South Africa continues its journey, her spirit remains. Not as a perfect icon, but as a reminder that true change comes from those willing to be uncomfortable. Those who understand that revolution happens not just in grand moments, but in daily acts of defiance. Will you see the systems that constrain you? Will you have the courage to challenge them? Winnie's greatest lesson wasn't about winning. It was about refusing to be silenced. The mother of the nation became something more. She became a mirror, challenging you to look deeper, fight harder, and never accept the world as it is presented to you. Her war is now yours. On the next episode of Goddesses, Winnie Mandela's story is a stark reminder that the fight for justice often demands immense sacrifice, blurring the lines between right and wrong. But what happens when the very foundations of society are rigged against you? This week, we're exploring iconoclasts and system shakers, figures who dared to challenge the status quo. What if I told you that another woman, decades earlier, faced a similar battle, not against racial segregation, but against the entrenched power of a patriarchal society? Imagine a world where women were denied the most basic right, the right to vote. Get ready, because everything changed when one woman decided that enough is enough, and ignited a movement that would shake the very foundations of British society. You won't want to miss this. Please like, subscribe, and scan the QR code, or follow the pinned link to get our free 7-day email course, Be an Unstoppable Woman. 7 days, 7 iconic women, Master the art of quiet power, lead without apology, and turn femininity into your greatest weapon. Click the video that just popped up to watch the next one in this series. Or for episode summaries, behind-the-scenes info, and more, go to daily8.com/god. Thanks for watching.